Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Feather of Light podcast. Welcoming you to this space. Welcoming you to this container that I'm creating for a variety of reasons. I would say one of which is advocacy. Another of which would be education. And another reason I do this, I would say, is community. Building community and connecting people, either with myself or with other community members who are healers, or additionally, just allowing people to step into certain containers, whether it be parts work, whether it be art therapy or counseling practices, or whatever, just trying to really develop a form of community that feels in integrity for me and embody what I consider are attributes of leadership. Right? Speaking my truth authentically and openly and courageously, and bringing in a voice to topics where I feel there needs to be advocacy and awareness and understanding. So today I'm going to be talking about my upcoming offering. Now, I'm not just going to be letting you know about it as a person trying to sell this thing. Actually, it's not going to be something that I charge very much for. It's going to be very accessible, but I want you to know about this thing because it's not just about the container itself. It's about the process that I would like to facilitate within each person that enters into my container or any container where they're creating safety and validation for their parts, for all the parts of themselves that I would reckon really need acceptance, are actively communicating with you through the body, and also communicate with all of the people in your life as well, right? Each of these parts kind of, in a way, takes over and has conversations for you, where I would like to invite a dialogue with a part that might otherwise feel like it needs to talk for you, to maybe just understand how we can advocate for you better. So basically, instead of someone coming in, let's just assume there's this analogy of you have a mediator, right? So you need to talk with someone, and then your mediator comes in, but your mediator is a little bit overly controlling. They kind of come in and they speak for you, but they don't necessarily understand every component of what it is they need to mediate. They're just kind of speaking, talking to your family, talking to your friends, talking to your partners. They're great at talking, but maybe there's a little bit less understanding going on than talking. And this is how I would say protector parts can operate, is they're advocating for you in a way that's maybe not actually encompassing all of your parts, or even what I would call self, which is you in your leadership energy, your energy that's connected to spirit. Let's just say that's the you that really understands what it is you need to convey or want to convey to a person, but don't always have the ability or courage or readiness, or even let's just say the words, right? You don't even necessarily have the words to do so. So self understands, self knows, right? It's like the intuition in a lot of ways. Self embodies this intuition. You understand what it is you want to say to your friends, your family, your loved ones. There's a deeper understanding within. However, once you actually go and speak with people, sometimes, and many times I would say, these protector parts kind of come online just as those conflicts are starting to arise, and they're the mediator that's not necessarily listening to you, and maybe the message gets drowned out a bit. So I would say having a better relationship with this protector part or different protector parts, whom is just acting as this mediator within your conversations, particularly conflicts or times you feel like your emotional safety is in jeopardy. Well, maybe they can be a little bit more fluent in the language of, let's just say, self energy, or what it is your deeper need actually is. And maybe the person whom is on the receiving end of that can actually get to know you and your needs and understand more about what it is that you're trying to express or receive, or what your needs are, versus the protector part who might be doing some of those things, but I would say oftentimes is trying to, in a sense, battle or negotiate or fight for certain things versus, I would say, really understand what it is you're trying to convey. So I guess there's something here I'm trying to explain around when your protector parts are even online. I think it's really important for us to recognize that protector parts are more often than not having conversations for us. And the benefit to this is that maybe we feel a little bit more emotionally safe, or that's like where our backbone can come online, and that can feel very empowering, right? Having that assertiveness and speaking directly, and there's a way to which we are setting boundaries that we need to set. However, sometimes the protector parts do this in a somewhat aggressive or kind of confrontational way, and you're kind of discluding yourself from the conversation, and in many ways also discluding another person. I would say protector parts, they're so good at getting your needs met that oftentimes they aren't able to do so from a place of compassion and balance and respect. And maybe I can just take a moment here. Just want to acknowledge my parts that come in during these podcast episodes. And just allow that part to soften a bit. Oftentimes what I'll tell my protector part, give them kind of a head nod, is just trust me. Just trust me on this one. I got this. We've had enough conversations where if I say I got this, the protector part doesn't entirely disengage, but they often kind of take that as an indicator to give me a little bit of space and see what other parts might come online, see how I and my self energy can handle the situation differently. And this changes everything about how I show up often. Changes my body language, which you can't see right now, but it changes how my body looks and feels. It changes the tone of my voice sometimes, or the cadence of how I speak. Maybe it's a little bit too subtle to notice now, but I do feel like my protector part kind of comes in a little bit more hot-headed and quickly. It's got something to prove. It definitely feels like it doesn't trust me to convey my messages as deeply or clearly. I'm just going to take this moment to acknowledge that part of me for all that it does and the ways that it shows up to support me and my clients and my podcasting sometimes. But this space I want to create, I would like us to remain within self-energy, that warmth, that compassion, that community, that connectedness. I would say as much as humanly possible. And Richard Schwartz speaks to this in a term he calls a critical mass of self. So when you're working with a client, there's only two of you in a container, let's assume. Among the two people, each of you has parts, for sure, and each of you has self-energy. And whatever the critical mass of both of those individuals combined is kind of like the prevalence of how much self-energy kind of permeates the whole container. It's kind of like if one's at a 40% self, 60% protector kind of vibe, well, the other person's got to be coming in with at least 60% self, just to kind of balance out that critical mass so that everybody's feeling contained, so that the parts aren't just kind of going haywire and kind of searching for a leader or a parent to kind of keep things in track. And I feel like that's one of the main things I would love to bring into these containers, is just to bring awareness to, if there's a critical mass of self in this space, and if there isn't, how can we get back there? What might each of us in the space be able to tell our parts to essentially regain that trust? Trust in the leadership that is self-energy, the inner leadership and the outer leadership. And then you can move forward, then you can sit with all your parts and be in what I would call an embodied state of presence. So to give you more of an outline, I suppose, of what I want to do in these spaces, is not going to be a container where we're processing trauma. It's not going to involve us getting deep into our own parts work process. And it's not going to be a substitute for therapy, coaching, group supervision. It might help you work with your parts in a more embodied way. And I really do want to invite you to bring in parts in some sense and really allow yourself to sit with your parts as they arise in the space. But that being said, I'm not facilitating one-on-one parts work with each individual that comes in, and I can't guarantee that same level of safety as if I were creating that container and working with a client one-on-one. And that's just simply one of the ethical concerns of doing group parts work versus, I would say, just working with a client in a closed container where there's more safety introduced. Now, that being said, I would like each individual to come in and just learn, like be open to learn more about what parts work is experientially, how they can go about continuing working with their parts throughout the week, in between their meditations or in between their sessions with a IFS trained coach or counselor. And I would say accountability is also something I'd love to really have as a priority in these sessions, is how can we as a community hold each other accountable for actively attending to the parts of us that really need consistent check-ins or a degree of validation or recognition or acknowledgement. And in addition to a little bit of education around parts work and accountability, I would like to offer a space of witnessing to a lesser extent. You know, as time permits, I would like people to tell me about what is their relationship to their parts. What do they understand about parts work and how it's been experienced so far? And just seeing how the container unfolds from there, really. I just feel like it's important for me as a facilitator and a trained counselor, but not as a IFS level 1 trained practitioner, but as a coach who does actively work with parts work as a modality and also does a lot of my own self-IFS work. I want to create a safe container that isn't crossing what I would consider are ethical parameters of how you can work with your parts in a community space. You know, what are those boundaries for you as an individual? And I would also just like to shed some light on what I've learned about what are some boundaries you can set when you're trying to work with your parts, more generally speaking, or in community spaces, and how maybe sometimes it's best not to bring in your parts unless there's a certain level of training or self-embodiment, or ideally a trauma-informed approach to working with each individual or creating safety more generally for the parts of every participant involved. So I'm going to be starting up these containers throughout probably this week. I'm going to start getting the posts created, and I'm going to start inviting folks into this space. The exchange will be $15 per person for 1 hour sessions, which will be probably about 5 to 6 people. Probably going to limit it at that. And I really just want individuals to come in and be open to learn about parts work. On some level, it's going to be an accountability space to encourage you to continue working with the parts that you've worked with so far. And then maybe just a space of reflection around what's come up for you around using parts work, or what is your relationship like to your parts. And additionally, I will share some resources I've come across, whether they be guided meditations or podcasts. And you can also reach out to me one-on-one if you feel called to work with parts in counseling sessions. I will be offering one-on-one sessions for this reason, or we can work with other tools as well. But parts work is something I feel quite confident in offering based on the amount of work I've done with my parts, based on the training that I've done, based on my familiarity with the do's and don'ts ethically. And maybe for those who are still new to parts work or haven't studied the tool, I can give you a bit of a brief introduction. So parts work is the process of working with your own mind in a way that essentially treats the mind like it's multiple personalities. So this isn't like you have a diagnosis. You're not, it's not pathological to consider yourself having multiple personalities. This is just a theory that treats the mind as though it is multiple different personalities with emotions, characteristics, voices, personality traits that all just communicate with each other like a family. Imagine you have a family within your mind, and each of those is very different expressions of gender even, and different, life experiences. And as a result, they hold different beliefs, and they're all in communication. They're all talking. They're all trying to figure things out. And what parts work essentially does is it starts to bring awareness to each part, which, by the way, can range from 5 to 15 different parts. But typically you start with just 1 or 2, and you start to see where you can locate these parts within the body. And you begin to notice how they impact your behavior or what patterns these parts have. And then gradually over time, you want to get to the point of indicating which parts are coming in and essentially trying to control situations like protector parts might, or they might be trying to escape certain feelings, like certain what are called firefighter parts would do this in the form of addictions. So impulsiveness and addiction is something that you can typically work with by communicating with certain parts. And then over time, you're trying to rework some of these beliefs, remove some of the what are called burdens that these parts have held, often since childhood, and then gradually bring awareness to these parts in terms of you're trying to get them to a place of where they are open to changing beliefs or working with you as opposed to against you. And, sometimes there can be working with more vulnerable parts, which are called exiles. And I would recommend that work in particular you need to do in a therapy space with a highly trained counselor, or you can do that on your own in an intimate way once you've worked with these parts. But that can often take, something like a year. It can take longer. Maybe some folks, it can take less, but I just want to give you a bit of a map where you start off just getting to know the family. Then you notice there's this wounded little kid, and you're doing everything you can to create safety, but recognizing that you can't just force these protector parts that are literally protecting this little kid. You can't just force this guard dog to go away. This is actually a really good analogy I've seen used for parts work is you're learning to get to know the guard dog. You're learning to get to understand how the guard dog responds as it's trying to protect this little baby. You can't just force the guard dog out of the way. You can't trick it. You don't want to just lunge past it. You just have to understand more about how this guard dog operates and get to know it so that at some point the guard dog might trust you enough so that it's like, oh, you're not going to hurt the baby? Okay. All right, here's your chance to talk with this little child. And you're gradually building that trust. You're gradually building that relationship. I would say something that many people do, what my perspective is wrong, I suppose, is they try to go through this process too quickly. They try to force their way past these guard dogs and get right to the inner child, as quickly or whatever, through whatever means they can. And they're not honoring the fact that these guard dogs, these protector parts, they're there for a reason. They understand you and the world that you've grown up in just as well as you do. They're intelligent, and they deserve to be treated with respect. And you will require their permission to move in a way with them, not against them. But I would say that you, as an individual, have access to something even more profoundly loving, intelligent, compassionate, and powerful than whatever these protector parts can access. And that would be self-energy, which is, in a way, to use this language that's more spiritual, it's like you have a connection to the source. You have a connection to something greater than you, and you're calling that energy in, you're embodying it to become the most connected, most complete, most balanced and loving version of you that knows how to work with these protector parts, knows how to offer them love and lead them and reparent them so that these exiles are in good hands. And every part of you knows that. And then your parenting is able to not just parent your inner child, your inner wounded parts, but you can start to extend that onto your relationships. You can start to extend this energy, this self-energy, onto your children, your future children. So this is why I do this work. This is why I see the value in working with parts work and really giving it the space and being patient and doing it what I'd consider the right way, especially using an ethical lens, so that you're creating safety for these parts. So you're creating acceptance for all parts of you and not denying the more challenging or scary or, parts that you deem as unworthy of love. You're not denying those parts. As Richard Schwartz says in his book, No Bad Parts, there's no bad parts. So maybe just leave that as the kind of takeaway here, is just remember, guys and gals, there's no bad parts. And I encourage you to have an openness to exploring parts work, to accepting and understanding all the different parts of you that arise in different situations in different parts of the body. And being open to what ways you can acknowledge these parts. You can create safety for these parts. If you feel called to join me, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to be running these sessions every second week, and we will be meeting, thinking around Monday, or maybe Saturdays actually. Saturdays, 10 a.m. feels about right, but I'm going to be playing with that one. Feel free to reach out over Facebook, Brandon Tilt on Facebook, or Instagram. You can reach out to Feather of Light Counseling, underscores in between. Or, of course, feel free to reach out to my email, featheroflightcounseling@outlook.com. Thank you for tuning in. As always, have a beautiful rest of your day. Take care for now.